When you announce your platform in full, will you give a cap on revenue sharing with First Nations?
Now this, I will wait till, I think 2 more sleeps till we release the document. But the first 4 years of this process will be largely sitting down and sorting out structures. That's why when I made the announcement, I didn't put any money on the table, because we're not talking about an amount of money, and First Nations don't want us to put an amount because they want this to be negotiated. The simple fact is that when the transfer occurred in 1930 from the federal government to the provinces and the resources were transferred, First Nations make a strong argument that the resources were never discussed with First Nations people, and there will be a court challenge. Treaty 4 has said very clearly, Perry Bellegarde and the members of Treaty 4, that they are going to go to court to determine what that settlement will be. There's 2 ways of dealing with this. One is through the courts, where you get an award or a settlement through, I would expect the final arbitration would be, if you go courtside, is the Supreme Court of Canada. Or you can sit down with First Nations people and discuss and sort out what is the solution. And in my view, Saskatchewan people have always been in favor of trying to negotiate first. Then if you can't agree, then the court system should kick in. But to go to court and spend millions of dollars holding a position without having formal discussions just doesn't seem to me to be a mature way for Saskatchewan people to carry forward on this.
But do voters not have a right to vote on what you're talking about here, whether you're talking 50-50, 25-75, 20-80? I mean, whatever you would negotiate and ultimately sign as Premier, do Saskatchewan voters not have a right to weigh in on what is acceptable to them and what is not?
I think in the first instance, it's to get the framework established. I think they also would have a right to know that if you don't negotiate, what is the Sask Party government planning to spend on legal fees to hold their position, because both have cost to it. So I think the legitimate question to both parties is, what are you going to spend to support your position?
Well, likely not billions on court. Likely they won't spend billions.
Well, there certainly won't be billions, or there's not hundreds of millions in our proposal. And we will.
Well, you don't have a number in your proposal.
No,
it could be billions.
We will, though, because the announcement we will make when we do the platform will outline the cost side.
It will. So even though you're saying you wouldn't get to money in the first 4 years, your platform will say we're willing to share up to 20% or up to...
What it will say is that we're setting up the framework for negotiations.
And it will have a price tag attached?
Well, the negotiations in the first 4 years would be very minimal. I don't want to give a number today because I want to do it all in the announcement.
Are you going to give a number on Thursday for how much you would consider revenue sharing with First Nations?
We'll put in our platform all of the costs for our 4-year budget period.
Right, but I'm not talking about the cost of negotiating. I'm talking about what you would be willing to share.
What we're talking about is negotiating. If I had a number in mind, the whole issue of duty to consult and accommodate would be thrown out. This is what the Sask Party's been doing on these kind of issues, whether it was the selling of 3.5 million acres. They make the decision, and then they go talk to First Nations people and tell them what the decision is. The fact of duty to consult and accommodate means you start talking and discussing, and over time come to a conclusion. But my guarantee is that, as with land entitlements, we would be making proposals that would be fair to all Saskatchewan people, both First Nations and those of us who are in the community of Regina or Saskatchewan.
Who decides the definition of fair?
Well, obviously that would have to be consultation with community groups, both First Nations and others. This consultation we're talking about will be broad and ranging, and it will include all Saskatchewan, not just First Nations. It will include advice from chambers of commerce, from individuals. This is not a small process that we're talking about. It's the first in Canada, and we'll be taking input from everyone who has an idea or a thought how we should solve the problem that First Nations people have less opportunities to education. The roads to the reserves, none of them are paved, whereas every community where I live and you live are paved. We have communities of First Nations people with 4,000 people living there where the roads are not paved. And so I understand the sentiment that's being put forward by the Sask Party that First Nations people are getting more than they deserve. But I would urge all of us to go to First Nation communities and look at the roads, look at the education system, and you quickly come to the conclusion you don't need a royal commission to realize that we need to do more to make sure
clear, but
every
how do you know money will
Saskatchewan
solve
family.
it? How do you know money will solve it? Because we've seen at the FSIN that there can be a huge disparity between what leadership is taking and what on the ground, if you will, First Nations get out of that.
We had that discussion with First Nations University, you'll remember, where the first reaction of the Sask Party government was to throw it away, close it down, and get rid of it. Then cooler heads prevailed, the president of the university and other people who have much more understanding of the situation. And what they did is sit down with First Nations people and not close the university down, but work with them to get the governance right. And if you go there today, it's working wonderfully. And this is what we would intend to do. We're not talking about cutting a check and not having involvement on the governance and making sure all of the systems are in place. We would work with First Nations people, as we did with the First Nations University, to make sure that the systems are in place of accountability, making sure that there were proper funding, that the money is going into roads and schools, so that, as the police chief in Saskatoon said this morning, that the idea that you just build more jails and hire more police, that's going to solve your crime issue or your social problems. Even police chiefs are saying, look, we need to deal with the root cause of social issues, which he said this morning are poverty and the lack of employment. And there are other more, I know what the Sask Party opinion is, but there are very, very bright people from academia, from universities, from the police forces across this province who understand that if we don't deal with some of these issues of First Nation communities, the consequences are dire for all of us, and it's not going to be cheap to take care and build twice as many prisons or deal and hire twice as many police, because if you're building twice as many prisons and hiring twice as many police,